All right, welcome back. And in this video, we're going to talk about spotting the flaws first. So if you ask a salesperson whether an objection to their sales presentation is bad, you'll get the answer no. A good salesperson knows that with any presentation or marketing, objections will arise. That's a good thing because once an objection is raised by the sales prospect, most people can resolve it and dismiss it, leaving the way clear to buying their product. So, objections typically are raised by the customer in most sales transactions, but this strategy is done by the seller and not the potential buyer. That's right. You will be the one raising the objections so that you can just as swiftly dismiss them and get to the closing. The reason this particular strategy is important in your marketing plan is because you are not interacting with the potential buyer face to face in most cases, especially in today's times. Most people own online stores, so they visit your site, find something they like, and like any reasonable customer, they will start to think of reasons they shouldn't buy it. That's just what people do. They resist being marketed to. So if your product has any obvious flaws, that's exactly the first objection that will be raised in their mind. Maybe the product is ugly, or it costs too much, or it's gotten bad reviews. Don't wait for the customer to raise that objection in their own mind and click away. Instead, you raise it first. So, for instance, if you know your product costs more than all of your competitors, raise that first by saying, our product costs more because it's better than the competition. And then go on to use that as a lead into the benefits. Okay, so let's talk about the strategic plan. The strategy is to disarm your buyer by bringing up the objection first, before they even have time to think about it or utter it in their mind. This works whether the product has some faults or not, but it is especially effective with those that have obvious faults. Don't believe that a buyer will miss a flaw with a product, or that if you concentrate on highlighting the good qualities, that the bad qualities won't be noticed. Consumers are very sophisticated these days. Online retailing has made it incredibly easy for them to do comparison shopping without having to visit multiple stores. Some sites even have reviews of products online that tell them which kinds are the best, like Amazon, of course. Of course, magazines like Consumer Reports will tell buyers what basic features they can expect from a product and what makes one a better deal than another. It's a bit naive to think that you will have a totally uninformed consumer drop by your website and not notice anything that is obviously flawed about your product. That doesn't mean that you can't bring that up first and either make it a feature or find a way to resolve that objection that satisfies them as fair. Okay, so let's look at what the psychological triggers are. When you bring up an objection first, it has a couple of effects. First, it makes you appear to be honest and forthright because you're willingly brought up the subject first. It also decreases the resistance your buyer may have to the objection because you've reframed it in a way that acknowledges the flaw but gives them a way to justify it. So, by simply being willing to be upfront, you can undercut the objections before they even happen. This is a way of disarming the reaction of the buyer by simply acknowledging the concern up front. If, on the other hand, you took the tact of trying to avoid the flaw and hoping they didn't see it, you would appear to be deceitful and the person would lose confidence in the sale. If you brought up the flaw but minimized it as a valid objection, your buyer will wonder what else is wrong with your product that you don't think is worth mentioning. But if you bring up the flaw, acknowledge it, and then resolve it for them in a way that they can justify the purchase, you close the deal. In a way, the buyer is more likely to trust the rest of the presentation because you didn't gloss over the bad features of your product. Since you were honest enough to be upfront, that lends you credibility and that credibility rubs off on the product, whether it deserves it or not. And when you go on to actually talk about the positive features, they are giving more weight because you were honest with the negative aspects of that product. While you might think people would be turned off by acknowledging a defect, hiding it under the rug is a worse offense in most people's mind. All right, so let's talk about implementing it effectively. This is something that you should consider when you have a product or service with an obvious flaw. So let's say that you're trying to sell used tires. Okay, used tires are obviously not as good as new tires, are they? Well, you can't advertise the tire like new tires. So you admit, hey, they're used tires. Then you can go on to say that despite the fact they are used tires and not brand new, they are checked to make sure they have sufficient tread on them. They pass some inspection for holes, etc. You offer a guarantee should they not last a certain amount of miles, and you can still offer the same brands that other retail people sell brand new. Oh, and don't forget that if they're used, you save money too, because the price is lower for the same name brand. This works well if you're selling items on eBay and they are not new or they have some obvious defect. You want to be completely upfront with that defect. It should be the very first thing you discuss so that there is obviously no misunderstanding that the product may be perceived to be flawed by other standards. The worst thing that can happen is that your customer gets a product delivered to them that doesn't match the description on your website. You can expect them not only to never buy another thing from your site or you, but on eBay and places that allow you customers to provide feedback, you'll get negative feedback and scare other customers away. However, that doesn't mean that you can only sell new products that are in perfect mint condition. Far from it. It means that you need to be explicit about the condition of the item that you are selling and very upfront about them. Another way to implement this is to offer a limited guarantee on the product. That way, if the person is completely unsatisfied, they can return it or get some form of compensation for their troubles. This is one way to dismiss many objections people might have about buying items that aren't new or in perfect condition. Unfortunately, for say online, people don't always, they don't read every piece of copy you put up about your product. However, they do usually read the very first part of the copy before scrolling down. It seems strange, but that's where you will put the acknowledgement of the defect. If you bury it elsewhere in the copy and get an order and a customer becomes irritated, directing them to the online copy where your flaw is buried 2/3 of the way down the page is going to make them even madder. On the other hand, if you say, yeah, this piece of art is but ugly, it's a great way to get attention and dismiss the worst effect you have on the product. Maybe the piece of art you are auctioning is but ugly. However, it's also one of the limited collection of prints made by a celebrated artist and worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. The customer scrolling through your website or whatever platform will initially be shocked to see that you actually admit that this product you are selling has an obvious flaw. They may even find it humorous. It will definitely get their attention, and that will lead them to read the rest of the copy, which explains all the other benefits and how you can dismiss the defect as either part of the charm of the piece or as not consequential to its actual value. Don't be afraid to get down to the real nitty-gritty details of why the product is flawed. Maybe it's ugly because it has too many loud colors. Maybe it's ugly because it has drab colors. Maybe it's ugly because it has abstract or too primitive. Whatever the problem is, be very clear that you understand that this is something most people would consider an undesirable trait. Then go on to dismiss it by building up the positive benefits of the product immediately afterwards. You are dismissing the flaw either by addressing the concern directly or you are going to show that despite this flaw, the benefit of the product far outweighs the flaw mentioned. This strategy is often used by real estate agents when they show houses with obvious flaws. They might point out the fact that the house is a little older than desired by the client, but the location is so good that the money they save in buying an older house can be used to update it, and then they have both a good location and newer home. They might show off the carpet with badly stained carpets and tell their buyer that since the carpets are so badly stained, they can ask for a carpet allocation and put whatever they want after they move in. Makes it their own. The trick here is to do this as people are considering buying your product, not as an introduction, but as part of the description of the item. Obviously, this strategy is best left to the actual sales page than as a way to introduce a product to people on online forums or discussion groups. It's for people who already have a good idea what they want to buy in this category and that they may have to make a decision on whether a flaw is apparent or maybe it's a deal breaker. So let's talk about timing this strategy. Time to bring up a default is not after you've sold them on the benefits, but before. It should be brought up immediately before the person has time to discover it themselves, but not as an introduction to people who haven't had a chance to discover your site yet. It's like the difference between seeing a house on the market and wanting to visit it and being at the door of the house and opening the door to actually experience it. If you are imagining the house from afar, if you start to talk about the flaws even before you visit it, the value of the house plummets and you're less likely to visit the house. You haven't had a chance to experience so that the better characteristics of the house can outweigh the flaws. So don't mention these items unless they are already in an area where they have an opinion to buy and can have a full experience of the product you are offering. Then it's more like you are there with a potential buyer and they are walking through the door as a real estate agent to show them your property that is for sale. If you're walking into a house as a real estate agent, you can say, the appliances are old, but you can always ask for appliance upgrades if you like the house. You don't wait until the person walks into the kitchen, stares at the appliances, and then says the appliances are outdated. If you've been in the house before, you should know the negatives. And it should be said as you're opening the door to let them in, preferably before they've even had a chance to see the kitchen. If you bring it up early in the experience, but not before they're actually there with you visiting the product, and in all its glory detail, they imagine something far worse, and when they get to the kitchen, they might even mutter, it's not that bad. That's because you are so upfront with them that they realize it's not a big deal. Online purchases, for instance, you don't want to put all kinds of objections on your homepage, but you do want the sales page to have them if you know there's a problem with the product. If you are doing eBay, for instance, to make sales and using them as sales partner, you will want to make sure it is in bold and a title heading at the top of the page. You don't want people to miss it and then end up with something they object to after they've already paid for the item. That will only irritate and get them really, really mad and cause negative feedback. So the best timing is always right up front to spot the flaws first. Hope this video helped. We'll see you in the next one.